On today's episode of Locked On Wild, the three-goalie rotation is actually happening this year.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Alex Micheletti joins us as we take a look back at the Tom Kurver's Prospect Showcase. We discuss what seems to be more of a momentum-gaining trend that the Wild are actually going to carry 3 goalies to start the season, and we'll take a look at how the Wild rank in some interesting tier lists as well. My name is Seth, Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, have been the host of Locked On Wild since 2021, and a credentialed Wild media member, joined by Alex Micheletti here today. And with how the Vikings did yesterday, Alex, I'm counting this as a victory Micheletti Monday, because the scores in at least that final Tom Kurver's Prospect Showcase game, a little on the lopsided side. But, this is the kickoff. We got preseason starting up this week, and we have officially hit the ground running with the NHL season. And I think a lot of us are very excited to see how this plays out. But as we'll talk about here in a little bit, seems like we're going to go into it with some head scratchers.
This team is never boring. The organization is never boring. They always provide some content. So, yeah, it was nice to see some players in Wild uniforms out on the ice in an actual game type in environment. And so we're here. Preseason's gonna be right around the corner. So let's do this.
In the Prospect Showcase, I was celebrating my birthday over the weekend down to start the weekend in Rochester, and then worked my way, back home to watch the Vikings. So I didn't have a ton of chance to watch the games, but from what I gather, and Isha and I dove into it pretty extensively for my Soda Pod appearance this week, but not a shock. It sounds like Riley Heidt was one of the guys that really stole the show. Caden Bankier had a couple of goals as well. And, it's a fun way to just kind of gauge the process of not the top level guys. Because you're not, we didn't see Jesper, although we'll talk about likely why that is here in a little bit. Didn't see Jesper. You didn't see some of those high-end prospects that expect to factor into the NHL roster this year. But it is fun to just see where some of the other guys are at. We had, all the main defensive prospects, Carson Lambos, Jack Pert, Kyle Masters, guys that people really are intrigued to see how they do this season. And so it was a nice mix of just seeing what these guys have. And on the goalie side, same thing. You had Samuel Levi, you had Chase Wutzke, a couple of guys that really are drawing some intrigue. And so a good weekend. I didn't hear any reports of anybody getting injured, which is also a plus. And so it looks like job well done, especially for Riley Heidt. Like, you want to go out there and you want to be the focal point, like where he's at in his process, trying to make the team, trying to make a roster spot with training camp and with preseason performances. You want to be one of the standouts from these types of events. And so by all accounts, he stole the show, and that's exactly what we were looking for here this weekend.
Oh, 100%. And we're going to talk about it later in the episode, but Heidt could still, there's ways of him making the team. It might affect some other guys being stuck in Iowa that probably don't want to be in Iowa, but it's going to be fascinating to see if he can. This was an opportunity for him to be in the spotlight, amongst his, select age group of peers, and for him to score, that is looks good in his his favor, we'll see. He's gonna just have to keep pushing. There was a quote from Bill Guerin that there's a little FU in his game, which is it gets people all fired up too. So when the GM is praising a player, a potential roster player, so we'll see. When he talks about him, he talks like he did when Brandon Duhaime was an unknown, and everybody's like, nobody really knew about Brandon Duhaime at the time, and he kind of forced his way on to the roster. So we'll see if Heidt can do the same thing.
It'll be very interesting to see how this roster plays out, because I know he's trying to kind of hedge his bets, but it just seems more and more like Bill Guerin is talking like, we're gonna try to squeeze him onto the roster, which makes what's coming next make absolutely no sense. But I really hope that he's given a legit shot. Mm-hmm. Like that is my overall, like, and we're gonna do like mission statements for the season. My hope through the preseason is that Riley Heidt is given a legitimate shot. Like, I'm not talking, hey, you got into the lineup as a fourth line guy, congrats. Put him with, because they're not going to play a ton, but put him with Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi, or Matt Boldy and Joel Eriksson Ek, or Kirill Kaprizov and Joel Eriksson Ek. Give him a shot to see where he stacks up with the big dogs, because that's the thing that I think has been confusing about some of these call-ups. Mm-hmm. Is we're not expecting Riley Heidt to be like a bottom six, like change of pace type guy. You're expecting him to be a huge part of what this team is going to be doing moving forward. So give him those opportunities. Like, give him the opportunity to just see where he's at in his process.
Yeah, and there's that top 6 spot clearly open because Marcus Johansson didn't do anything. Everybody else that was given an opportunity really didn't show that they deserved to be in that spot. So it should be an open competition for Heidt, for Ogren, for Husendidov. I mean, there's that glaring hole right there.
The one guy that I want to shout out, because Isha and I talked about him a little bit over on the Soda Pod, Stevie Leskovar was a menace. Like, there are some good highlights of him absolutely laying the lumber against Chicago. And I like how high Isha is on him because of what he brings to the table as a very physical defenseman. Something that Bill Guerin really values. And so don't be surprised. Not a ton of an
organization too. So yeah, when you have that attribute, that helps.
Don't be surprised if he gets fast tracked, if he's ready. Like, if he shows that he's close within the next couple of years, don't be surprised if he gets fast tracked, because the physicality, the heavy hitting, like that kind of stuff is needed, especially with the makeup of this roster as it is. And if he brings it, like, we'll find out. We're going to get into it here because some comments made over the weekend make it seem like the Wild are going to carry 3 goalies to start the season, and it makes me want to light my head on fire, because it's just it's infuriating, honestly. And so we're going to talk about the likelihood that the Minnesota Wild break camp with 3 goalies and what that means for the rest of the roster as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You have heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook today. Again, you have till September 22nd to take advantage of this deal from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We are going to be continuing with the player previews here over the next couple of weeks, and the network, Locked On, has some extra programming that will be coming your way as well. So stay tuned for that. We got a lot that we're going to be hitting you with from now until the start of the season, which is October 10th. So stay tuned. Locked On Wild has you covered. All right, let's get into it, Alex. Judd's Hockey Show had John Hines on late last week, and I didn't find out about this until after I was back, because the campsite that I was staying at had 0 cell service. Like, instead of showing like the number of bars that you had, my phone just said SOS. So I'm like, that's unfortunate, but
we'll see it on the other side.
Yeah, it was fun, and honestly, it was kind of fun just being off the grid for a couple of days. But I came back and saw that John Hines was on, and we had some comments in the Locked On Wild comment section over the weekend as well. It sounds like this 3-goalie thing has a lot of steam, and I got to tell you, I don't get it. I just don't understand why this is something that the Wild appeared dead set on doing, for a number of reasons. Number one, again, you're right up against the cap. And so by having Jesper on the roster, you are preventing somebody else from having one of those spots, i.e. Riley Heidt, because Jesper's current salary is $925K. And so you put him on the roster, you're like, I think the actual breakdown was something like $500K in cap space. You got nothing. And so that is a very valuable roster spot. So that's number one. Number two, if you are going to have Jesper on the roster, then you are confirming what a lot of us feel already, that Jesper doesn't stand to learn anything else at the Iowa level. He has completed his training. He's graduated from playing at the AHL level. And you feel like the next part of his process is being on the NHL roster. But you're really going to go through the early part of the season and mix him in once in a while, because Philip Gustafson's not going to get a ton of time off, because he's going to be the one that's expected to get the Wild through most of the season from a goalie perspective. Marc-Andre Fleury's 39 years old. Bill Guerin may say that he thinks he can still start 40 games. Highly unlikely. And so you're going through with those two as your primary goalies, and you're going to have Jesper here. And I think we knew that unless there was a goalie move made, he was going to be the injury fill-in. But you're going to have him on the roster and, give him starts here and there, as opposed to getting, like, he could in Iowa probably start between 50 and 60 games. Is he better served doing that? Or is he better served sitting on the bench and starting once every 5 or 6 games? I think it's a pretty easy choice for me. I would rather he be on the NHL roster right now, but with this current makeup, his best scenario for the season is to just continue to pile up starts. And if he can't do that at the NHL level, he better be down in Iowa doing it.
Yeah, it makes no sense to have him be just stuck in the press box right by you. He could be your post game correspondent if that's how it's gonna go. But it doesn't do any of them favors. It doesn't help Marc-Andre. It doesn't help Filip Gustafsson. Yeah, it's the old saying again where if you have three goalies, you don't really, it's like the two quarterbacks. If you have two, you don't really have one. So it's just it's a kind of a mess. And this Wild team has clearly shown that they can't stay 100% healthy a lot of the time too.
Yeah, I just don't get it, because you just look at the roster and like the players that are going to be on this team. There are a lot of them, and there are a few guys in particular that I think we all agree could be valuable roster spots in which you can provide an upgrade by somebody that is a little less experienced but has more to offer. And those spots are not those spots are not frequent. And so if you're going to, teams don't carry three goalies as it is. Like, I can understand if you have like a 10-game road trip, and this is probably the justification for it at the beginning of the season, is because the Wild are on the road for like 10 straight games. And so if you have an injury to one of those guys, then you're kind of SOL unless you have an additional goalie on the roster. That's one thing. But if you get through that road trip and are not immediately like, okay, let's do something else with this roster spot, like if he just stays up the whole season, it may be a little much to go as far as saying it's stunting his development, but it's certainly not helping it.
Yeah, it causes chaos for everybody, and and it's never really worked at the NHL level with other teams. I mean, maybe in short stints, but long term, it's not great for a team that thinks they can make the playoffs. Which, well, that's a lot to ask if they're going to do this way.
The situations in which it has been quote unquote successful is when you've got about a 38, 39, 40-year-old veteran who is the third wheel, who is the one that is getting like 10 to 15 starts and is okay with that because it's either do that or retire.
We're can't see talking about that, and he didn't come back to be the like a charity type.
No,
thing. Yeah, that's not how you treat a former Stanley Cup champion too. Yeah, Hall of Fame first ballot.
And again, this is me probably a little overreacting. We can't really make a determination until we see what the roster looks like. But if it's being discussed, then that means that it is something that the team has given a lot of thought to, which again is not something I'm super on board with. Like, well, if you're gonna go into next season with Filip Gustafsson and Jesper as your goalie tandem, which is what I would like, you're going to go into the year and you're going to say, yeah, we think Jesper had a really good year development wise. He got 6 starts. Like, no, that's not progress.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I was going to bring up too is Bill Guerin clearly did not want this roster to be set, with him doing everything to try to get Patrik Laine. So I think he still has things up his sleeve that he's trying to figure out because he desperately wanted, it seems like another top 6 forward that was outside of the organization. And, with the goalie market too, it just, it seemed like, I don't know how hard they tried to move Gustafsson, but they didn't try hard enough or teams. The scary thing is all these goalies got moved and they saw the tape on Gustafsson and they must think that it's not going to get better. It got worse, but is it going to get back to, because that's the unknown. And is he going to be in shape, Filip Gustavsson? Because that's a big problem for him.
I think if he can be, even like 70% of what he was 2 seasons ago, I think that's a win. And I think he can get back to that level. Maybe that's like the best that Filip Gustavsson has to offer. But you're now running into a situation where, like, as preseason gets going, as training camp gets underway, you've got this thought in Bill Guerin's head of like, well, we need to free up some spots. And I don't want him to just go to the guys that don't have trade protection and say, well, this is the path of least resistance. You put this roster together, you're going to have to make a tough choice. And so, that's another thing that I'm watching this preseason is if these young players do like we think they're going to, are you going to do what's necessary to give them an opportunity to shine? Yeah.
And a name that hasn't been talked about a whole lot, and I'm kind of surprised, is what are they going to do with John Merrill? It doesn't, because it doesn't seem like he has a clear roster spot. And it seems like they're going to try to maybe put him on waivers. And then if not, bury his contract in Iowa. It just doesn't seem like there's any chance, especially with, Chisholm now on the team as well.
Yeah. He really, I think, really only factors into even a little bit of playing time if there's an injury in front of him. Like otherwise he's going to be in the press box the whole season.
Yeah.
If the Wild stay relatively healthy, he'll probably get mixed in sparingly if somebody needs a night off. But other than that, like
the Alex Goligoski treatment.
Yeah, that's all the Wild have to offer. So I don't know. We'll see. The great equalizer in preseason for a team with a lot of roster questions is preseason injuries. We saw that last year. So hopefully that doesn't happen this year. Hopefully it's just that players, the young guys really perform well and it leads to some tough decisions. Well,
the most ironic thing that the Wild did is sign the kid that injured Jared Spurgeon. Reese Johnson is
boy
on the Iowa Wild, or if he doesn't make the Heartlanders. But yeah, just kind of ironic that they sign the player that hurts the captain and pretty much derailed the last year's season.
A lot of questions before the season gets started, and we'll continue to dive into them. We'll take a look at all the storylines as we get you set for the season right here on Locked On Wild. When we finish up the show, when we come back, we're going to take a look at how the Wild stack up in some interesting tier lists. Alex and I were talking about this over the weekend, and we'll see where the Wild stack up in a couple of interesting tiers. That's on the way to finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. One final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder for you, the Locked On Wild sweepstakes continues as we'll be taking submissions up until the first week of October for a chance for you to head to XL Energy Center to watch the Minnesota Wild take on the Columbus Blue Jackets. We're giving away 2 tickets to that game on opening night. All you have to do to enter is take a screenshot of proof that you have subscribed on YouTube and add your name in as well, just so that I can keep track. Email that to lockedonwild@gmail.com, and you're entered. And we will be drawing the winner in the first week of October, which is going to be here before you know it. So full contest rules can be found in the description of today's episode. Alex, Mike Bartner on Instagram, a hockey content creator, and he does a lot of these lists, various, ranking the, like I've got one here, predicting the highest paid goalies in 3 years. Does a lot of, good stuff cool graphics, and you drew my attention to a couple that I thought were really intriguing over the weekend. And let's go to what he's calling the best prospect big three. Best forward, defenseman, and goalie prospects in the league. And the San Jose Sharks were number one with Celebrini, Dickinson, and Askarov. Montreal was number two with Demidov, Hudson, and Fowler. Your Minnesota Wild check in at number three with Danila Yurov, Zeev Buium, and Jesper Wallstedt. All expected to be, high impact pieces of this Minnesota Wild lineup. And so I like that they're at three. Should they have been a little higher than those other two big threes?
Yeah, that's San Jose just because they have Celebrini. That kind of gets.
Yeah.
But I like Buium over Dickinson, but it's such a hard, maybe a little bit higher than Montreal. I think San Jose is for sure one, but you could argue that the Wild have a little bit. I like Fowler, the goalie from Boston College. He had a heck of a season in World Junior, but the Wild would be right there with their trio.
He also did a list ranking every big three in the NHL: best forward, defenseman, and goalie. Minnesota Wild were in the top 20 with their list. Kaprizov, Faber, and Gustafsson. And I got to wonder, 16 through 9, pretty darn good. The fact that the Florida Panthers are at 9, the fact that Dallas is at 10 is kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. I got to feel like the questions around Philip Gustafsson are why the Wild rank at 18 here. So I think maybe they should be a little higher on these rankings, especially.
Yeah, it comes down to the goaltending and the off year that Gus had. If he can bounce back, then they definitely would get closer to the top 10.
He also has top 10 bandwagons to join this season. Number 1 is the New Jersey Devils. Number 2, the Nashville Predators. Number 3, the Dallas Stars. Number 4, the Washington Capitals. Number 5, the Utah Hockey Club. Number 6, the Minnesota Wild. And as Mike says in the description, this is really just based on vibes of how active the teams were this offseason and how likely they are to improve over last season. Also, how likely making the playoffs or going on a deep run was. Did not consider any teams that won a cup recently. Wild weren't active, but I can see where the national steam expects, because the Wild they've been a playoff team over the last 13, 14, 15 years. Like, they've been a playoff team, haven't really gone anywhere. And so I can see where the logic says, well, because they didn't make the playoffs this past season, they're going to improve and make the playoffs in 2024, 2025. But I think those of us here expect that this is going to be tough, especially with how the Central Division is lined up, that it's going to be tough to make the postseason for the Minnesota Wild this year.
Yeah, the defense, which has always been the calling card of the Wild, it's continued to go the opposite way of being a strength, and special teams has been a major red flag. So unless those two things improve and the goaltending, because they can score, it's a matter of keeping it out of their own net is the major issue. Because I think they, having Kaprizov, having Boldy, those guys are going to put up big numbers, but they don't play defense and they don't play goalie. So, and neither of them really play penalty kill. Boldy might start to now, but the penalty kill is such a glaring issue on this team still.
Well, as long as the Wild go with 3 goalies, and again, if they do this just because the first 12 games of the season, I think 10 of them are on the road. If they do that just to start the year and then back off of it, okay, fine. But if they roll through the season and are like, I think we're just going to keep doing this, I'm going to get cranky. So just please, give Jesper consistent starts at the NHL level, or just send him back down to Iowa. I think the point is that if the starts aren't available at the NHL level, then he should just continue to start in Iowa until they are, as opposed to just taking up a spot on the bench.
Yeah, 100%. It's just it's so frustrating when it's you see moves like that really could throw off the vibes of the team, how it's going to function. And there's new additions to the coaching staff, and how's Jack Capiano, how's that going to enter in, because Darby was so beloved in that locker room, and how the players would come to him, and he was kind of in between the head coach and just someone they could talk to and go to for help and just a great leader. So that's gonna be tough to replace, and we'll see if that move works or not, for sure.
That'll do it for today's show. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. As always, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We are going to continue to ramp things up as we get closer to the season, which is under a month away. And so make sure that you stay tuned so you don't miss out on any of the big storylines heading into the season, because we've got you covered here at Locked On Wild. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.